A few miles away from Wharton Swamp, in the small town of Clinton Center, Henry Hossing sleepily crawled out of the improvised alley shack which had afforded him a degree of shelter for the night, and stumbled into the street. Passing a hand across his rheumy eyes, he scratched the stubble on his cheek and blinked listlessly at the rising sun. He had not slept well. The storm of the night before had kept him awake. Besides, he had gone to bed hungry, and that never agreed with him. Glancing furtively along the street, he walked, slouched forward, with his head bent down, and most of the time he kept his eyes on the walk or on the gutter, in the hopes of spotting a chance coin. Clinton Center had not been kind to him. The handouts were sparse, and only yesterday he had been warned out of town by one of the local policemen. Grumbling to himself, he reached the end of the street and started to cross. Suddenly, he stopped quickly and snatched up something from the edge of the pavement. It was a crumpled green bill, and as he frantically unfolded it, a look of stupefied rapture spread across his bristly face. $10. More money than he had possessed at any one time in months. Stowing it carefully in the one good pocket of his seedy gray jacket, he crossed the street with a swift stride. Instead of sweeping the sidewalks, his eye now darted along the rows of stores and restaurants. He paused at one restaurant, hesitated, and finally went on until he found another, less pretentious one a few blocks away. When he sat down, the counterman shook his head. "Get going, bud. No free coffee today." With a wide grin, the hobo produced his $10 bill, spread it on the counter. "That covers a good breakfast here, partner?" The counterman seemed irritated. Okay. What'll you have?" He eyed the bill suspiciously. Henry Hossing ordered orange juice, toast, ham and eggs, oatmeal, melon, and coffee. When it appeared, he ate every bit of it, ordered additional cups of coffee, paid the check as if $2 breakfasts were customary with him, and then sauntered back to the street. Shortly after noon, after his $3 lunch, he saw the liquor store. For a few minutes he stood across the street from it, fingering his $5 bill. Finally, he crossed with an abstracted smile, entered, and bought a quart of rye whiskey. He hesitated on the sidewalk, debating whether or not he should return to the little shack in the side alley. After a minute or two of indecision, he decided against it and struck out instead for Wharton Swamp. The local police were far less likely to disturb him there, and since the skies were clearing and the weather mild, there was little immediate need of shelter. Angling off the highway, which skirted the swamp several miles from town, he crossed a marshy meadow, pushed through a fringe of brush, and sat down under a sweet gum tree which bordered a deeply wooded area. By late afternoon, he had achieved a quite cheerful glow, and he had little inclination to return to Clinton Center. Rousing himself from reverie, he stumbled about, collecting enough wood for a small fire, and went back to his sylvan seat under the sweet gum. He slept briefly as dusk descended, but finally bestirred himself again to build a fire, as deeper shadows fell over the swamp. Then he returned to his swiftly diminishing bottle. He was suspended in a warm net of inflamed fantasy when something abruptly broke the spell and brought him back to earth. The flickering flames of his fire had dwindled down until now only a dim, eerie glow illuminated the immediate area under the sweet gum. He saw nothing, and at the moment heard nothing, and yet he was filled with a sudden and profound sense of lurking menace. He stood up, staggering, leaned back against the sweet gum, and peered fearfully into the shadows. In the deep darkness beyond the waning arc of firelight, he could distinguish nothing which had any discernible form or color. Then he detected the stench and shuddered. In spite of the reek of cheap whiskey which clung around him, the smell was overpowering. It was heavy, fulsome, fetid, alien, and utterly repellent. It was vaguely fish-like, but otherwise beyond any known comparison. And as he stood trembling under the sweet gum, Henry Hossing thought of something dead, which had lain for long ages at the bottom of the sea. Filled with mounting alarm, he looked around for some wood which he might add to the dying fire. All he could find nearby, however, were a few twigs. He threw these on, and the flames licked up briefly and subsided. He listened and heard, or imagined he heard, an odd sort of slithering sound in the nearby bushes. It seemed to retreat slightly as the flames shot up. Genuine terror took possession of him. He knew that he was in no condition to flee. And now he came to the horrifying conclusion that whatever unspeakable menace waited in the surrounding darkness was temporarily held at bay by the failing gleam of his little fire. Frantically, he looked around for more wood, but there was none. None, that is, within the faint glow of firelight. And he dared not venture beyond. He began to tremble uncontrollably. He tried to scream, but no sound came out of his tightened throat. The ghastly stench became stronger, and now he was sure that he could hear a strange, sliding, slithering sound in the back shadows beyond the remaining spark of firelight. He stood frozen in absolute, helpless panic as the tiny fire smoldered down into darkness. At the last instant, a charred bit of wood broke apart, sending up a few sparks, and in that flicker of final light, he glimpsed the horror. It had already glided out of the bushes, and now it rushed across the small clearing with nightmare speed. It was a final incarnation of all the fears, shuddering apprehensions, and bad dreams which Henry Hossing had ever known in his life. It was a fiend from the pit of hell come to claim him at last. A terrible, ringing scream burst from his throat, but it was smothered before it was finished, as the black shape of slime fastened upon him with irresistible force.